Hello and welcome back again. This week we're going to have a look at more of a tech topic than we've been doing so far. Get into the technology a little bit, just enough to help us out as business people. We're going to learn some of the key technologies and things around that we need to know in order to do our jobs better. Now this unit covers two chapters in our book, by the way, chapters 4 and chapter 6. So keep that in mind as you're working through it. Twice as much to read through in a way, and there will also be 2 simulations on the textbook website to look at. But I'm going to combine these 2 chapters into just one quiz in D2L. So what do we want to learn out of this? Well, it'd be nice to understand what infrastructure is, right, and what the parts of that are, and why do we need to know about it, or what the important elements are. We'll also look at trends in technology that are happening and continue to happen. Maybe try to think ahead a little bit. And then also talk about some of the management issues and solutions that we could potentially come up with to help with those. So infrastructure is the shared technology resources that sort of provide the base or the platform for a company or an organization to do their job. So if you think about Camosun, well, we've got a lot of technology infrastructure. You just think of the Wi-Fi that people use when they come into the buildings. That's part of our infrastructure. We've got all the computers and software and all those things around. And we have more than that, right? So we've got hardware and software. We've got networks. But we've also got other things like the services we provide for students and for staff, our support services. We may have other things like training that are going on. Perhaps we have courses in how to use D2L that we run on a regular basis for new instructors. We'd consider that part of our infrastructure as well. So it's more than just the kind of nuts and bolts. It's the entire package that helps us do what we want to do. So we've got all our physical devices and all the associated business pieces that go with that to help us run our enterprise. All right, so I think the first one, no problem. We can think about that, all of the computer stuff, but let's also think about telecommunications, right? We've got all of our phone systems and everything in place at the college. Data management services, that's a whole other piece. And data management is a big deal at a place like Camosun because, of course, we deal with student data, don't we? And that's a pretty important part. All of the services that we provide around our, software. So, the ability to change your password, all those types of things in there. Facilities and physical facilities are another part sometimes people don't think about. Think about our buildings. What if the power routinely went off? We had regular brownouts or blackouts. Well, that wouldn't be any good. What if the server rooms got too hot? Things like that. What if there were drippy, leaky pipes everywhere? What if there's not enough power outlets in the classrooms? All of those things are more on the physical facilities side. They're part of our infrastructure as well. And then all of these things like how we manage all of our technology, the standards we put in place, and we have quite a few standards here at the college, right? Some of the obvious ones would be to deal with student privacy, for example. We have standards in place where we can't access certain websites or certain programs that we might like to use because they violate our standards, right? And then sort of all the education, research, and development activities that we take on and work on, developing new, pieces for D2L, for example, new ways to offer online training, that sort of thing. That would be considered part of it as well. I think for us, it's kind of useful to think about these things from a service perspective. So what service does this provide to the organization? Because, again, there's got to be some value, doesn't there? So we're providing things so that we can do the services that we want to do. All right. Now, if I just jump back to the last unit we covered on strategy, and ask you a question. Is the type of strategy we choose going to impact our infrastructure? So if you think about the 4 strategies we had, one of them might be to be a low-cost industry leader. Another option might have been to be focusing on a particular portion of the market, a market niche, and try to become, sort of the best, right? Be a little bit different. Does that could impact the type of technology and the infrastructure we'd have put in place? Probably. I would think so. If we're trying to be the low-cost institution, we may not invest a lot of money in technology that, makes us seem like we're personalized and that sort of thing. Whereas if we're trying to be that sort of personalized educational experience, we may want to have the infrastructure in place to make that happen. All right. Maybe good student relationship management systems, good online teaching platforms, widely available resources, including Wi-Fi. Again, go back to the low-cost one. Might be perfectly acceptable for a low-cost institution to have just sort of a low-end Wi-Fi service where students were constantly getting dropped or had to wait or that kind of thing because they didn't care. They're just trying to be low cost. But if we care about customer service, we'd go the other way, wouldn't we? So our strategy and all of that we've looked at already plays a role in this. It doesn't hurt to have a bit of a historical perspective on this, so let's take a look at how things evolved over time. Really going back to 1950s, really, end of the 1950s, we ended up in the mainframe mini computer sort of era. And we still have those types of machines around with us. Modern versions, of course. Big, powerful computers that can do lots of work. But around about the 1980s, early 1980s, we got into something called the personal computer era. So when PCs started showing up. I remember I was pretty young then, but I remember PCs sort of arriving and changing everything because now people could have their own computer. Up until that point in the mainframe era, you had to book time on a computer. It was sort of, one big resource people would schedule and share and use and that sort of thing. And now suddenly we had the ability to have our own computers on our desks where we could do work. That worked pretty well, although we found really early on that one big thing that was lacking was the ability to share, communicate well with each other. And so quickly, right after that, we saw the client-server era coming in. And really, that's all about networking. So we've got a powerful server computer and lots of client computers hooked up to it. So now I can email my coworkers or send them documents or things like that, and we can share a program, maybe an HR application where we track employee information. We can all access it. That was a client-server era, and that's still going on because networking is really what that's all about. So let's write networking in there. So that was key, and that moved business forward a lot, didn't it? You can imagine the benefits that's going to bring to business. Well, not long after that, we got into the enterprise computing era, and we're going to learn a lot more about that soon, but the basic idea there was, okay, we've got all these computers hooked up now. Everyone's doing their own work on their computer and maybe sharing their results back and forth. Can we come up with software that covers the whole company now that everyone can access so that everything's stored consistently and safely and everyone's using the same type of software? So instead of me having my own database and my coworker downstairs having their own database and it maybe make it difficult to consolidate and share data, we're now going to move into a company-wide or an enterprise-wide piece of software for our databases so that we can share things more easily. That's not that long ago, but that was another big step forward for companies. All right. And then about the year 2000, we started to see mobile computing and cloud computing showing up. And I think especially in the last 10 years, we've seen that really take off, right? So Everyone now has a mobile device. Some people have more than one. Many people at work have mobile devices that they can use for their work and take with them. More often than not, we find our applications that we're using are not running on our local computer, but are in the cloud somewhere. Accounting software, for example, is an obvious one. All kinds of other enterprise systems. Now we're doing cloud computing. And so we've made another big leap forward, haven't we? Right? That's changed business dramatically, and I think is continuing to change business. So that's sort of the big impact to us right now. And then, of course, we have another one, which I don't have on here, but I think within a year or two, I should probably add it to my list. Any guesses what that would be? Artificial intelligence, machine learning, neural networks, that kind of thing, where we're seeing sort of new abilities and capabilities, especially around data analytics, showing up. All right? And so that might be a new one that sort of starts about now and carries forward over time. Right? So that could be another one that we look at. We also have something else going on, the Internet of Things, and I think that's just going to become more and more something we talk about. And we're living in the age of data, not just only old data though, big data, right? So big data now. So we've got these other trends happening that are going to impact our infrastructure and, sort of dictate what options are available to us and what kind of things we might use to help propel our businesses or our organizations forward. All right, so that puts a little perspective on it. Now there's some management issues that come up for us around this and we need to think about a little bit. How do we deal with change around all of this? So as my organization grows, am I able to be scalable? Scalable means I can change the size, right? So Camosun used to have 10,000 students, now we have closer to 20,000 students. Is our technology able to keep up? Do we have to add some new technology in the mix or replace something that's old? That sort of thing. And then how flexible is our technology? I think COVID provided a really good example of this. Was the technology we use for teaching flexible enough to allow us to move from the classroom to an online environment in any kind of reasonable way? Well, you can answer that yourself based on your own experience. You may say yes, you may say not really, you may say yeah, sort of in between. I think overall, if you think about what most organizations have done a pretty good job, but was it flexible enough? I think there's been frustrations along the way too, right? So we think about that a little bit. That's one management issue. Another one deals with sort of governance and management, right? And so do we have the policies and procedures in place to handle new technology as it comes along? Privacy might be an example there. Do we have policies in place around privacy? Did we have them in place before people started sharing data and were able to share it widely? Or did we play catch up? Often we find we're playing catch up around this kind of thing, aren't we? So we're always trying to play catch up over time. Same thing, governments trying to put in legislation and things like that. They're always playing catch up, right? They see a problem and try to fix it after the fact. So that's a challenge. And if we're dealing with governance as well, sort of a similar issue that comes with that is who's in charge? So is the IT department in charge of choices we make? Or is the School of Business in charge of the software they choose to use? And who's supposed to pay for that? Those are interesting challenges and if you do them right, you can get a big benefit from it. But if you do it wrong and end up in an endless argument, you can really hold the organization back. And so that's a challenge. And usually that's a difficult one for people to wrestle with because it involves budgets and money. So if we say, oh, this is all part of the School of Business now, the IT department might lose some budget and they might lose positions as a result and not be as important. So they may fight that, right? Or vice versa. And so we have to think about that sort of thing. And if we are thinking about money now, can we make wise investments for the future? So can we put our money into the right things? Well, we can look at competitive forces, right, for our industry and think about our IT infrastructure and maybe make some good choices there. Camosun is investing a lot of money now into a new version of CamLink so that we can improve the student experience. Right? We've invested in other new technologies as well, like wireless support for students. During COVID, we invested a lot of money into purchasing laptop computers that students could borrow through the library. That sort of thing. Are we making wise infrastructure investments that'll pay off over time? And then one of my favorite topics to talk about is the total cost of ownership, TCO. Right? So it's not just the hardware and software. Right? When we go and buy something, we have to think about getting it installed and up and running, all the project management that may go with that. We have to think about the training for the employees and with our customers. So if we put a new version of CamLink in, there's a lot involved with that beyond just buying the software. All of the employees are going to have to be retrained. Students are going to have to learn new systems. Some people may not like the new system and not be able to deal well with it, that sort of thing. And that's another cost. So we've got all these issues going on sort of around the technology that add up and become the cost, and maybe the majority of the cost, 60, 70, 80% sometimes of the cost of new technology has nothing to do with the hardware and software. It's to do with all those other things that go with it. All right. So these are all challenges that we have to think about a little bit as managers. Who controls our IT infrastructure? I mentioned that earlier a little bit. Is it the IT department or do the individual departments control it? Is it centralized or decentralized? So is one group in the organization in charge of everything and you have to go ask them for all your resources? Or have we split it out to each division? Okay. And then along with that, how do we allocate costs? And that's often the big thing because money is power, isn't it? And so when we start playing with that, we can cause issues for people. This person may be happy, this person may be not so happy, right? And so we have to think about that a little bit. I worked in an organization once where I was in charge of the Department of Finance and the technology group. I also had another director in that organization who was in charge of one satellite location. Up until I came along, they did their own IT thing over there. They had their own piece of the budget went to them, and they chose what they did. And they actually settled in on Mac computers. They went all Apple, and they were running their location just fine. The entire rest of the organization, everywhere else, was using PCs. But they were able to get away with it because they were given a certain amount of money each year to spend on technology, and they could do what they liked. I came along and I said, well, we're going to have to centralize and make things consistent in order to move forward, because at that point we were starting to adopt enterprise software. And so we wanted to be able to have that available to everyone, and we couldn't do that with our current hardware and software. That was a big battle, right? That was a difficult battle between myself and the director of that group. And in the end, the thing that really helped was that I was also in charge of finance. So I just pulled his budget eventually and said, look, I'm going to approve all expenditures from now on related to technology, so it doesn't matter, right? Okay, we're going to do it my way. Can you see that kind of wrestling that could go on there? Now, and it was a challenging time, believe it or not. Now, actually, we're still good friends. And in fact, I just an email from him saying he's back in town and he'd like to get together again. So, we're able to separate the personal side from the work side. He's a nice guy and a brilliant guy, and I think he thinks highly of me too. But boy, we could sure get into it over fighting about the technology, and that was a difficult choice for the organization to make. Ultimately, though, making that choice gave us one common platform that we could build upon to go and do new applications and new services, and it's paid off really well. And I think in hindsight, he appreciates that, but he sure didn't like having his budget cut. So there we go. So that's a big piece of it. And we have to think about that because that's all the human side, isn't it? And that's usually what causes us some trouble. We fail to take into account how people think. All right, so the logical choice may not necessarily be the comfortable choice for some people or the choice that they would make. All right. Now, if we get this wrong, what's going to happen? Boy, you could hamper your organization for a long time so that you're not able to move forward. That could be an issue. If we don't clearly define responsibility, we could have a lot of hurt feelings and maybe even some people quitting in frustration and losing personnel. Otherwise good people that we may not want to lose, all because we failed to do this properly. So we do have to take that into consideration as well. So there are some technologies we want to learn about. And rather than me talk for 2 hours about them all, we're going to do it in I think, a more fun way, a more interesting way for you. And so I put together a list of these key sort of hardware, software, networking, cloud, you name it, technologies that I think are worth learning about. And I'm going to ask you to explore those as part of our next exercise and share your work back to the class. I think getting an early start on this is really going to help because there is a bit of work to get done. And even just choosing your topic and that sort of thing, that's going to be part of it. And we're going to use Microsoft Sway to create a little website. So at the same time, we'll be learning another new piece of software, which is kind of fun and you may find useful in a lot of different ways. So that's what our next exercise is all about. So I'd like you to finish reading through chapters 4 and 6, and I think a light reading of those is probably best because there are some hardcore tech topics in there, and that's a little tougher to read in depth, but just think, okay, as a business person, let me learn enough about this to be comfortable. There are 2 chapter simulations available on the textbook website, so we want to do both, the one for chapter 4 and the one for chapter 6. So this week you'll have 2 of those. I have just one quiz that combines things. And then exercise 4, I posted all of the details. You're going to have to pick a technology topic and it's going to be first come, first serve. So I'm going to have the process up there for how we're going to do that. All right. So I would suggest an early start is better than waiting until later in the week. All right. Well, good luck with that. I've kept this short to give you even more time to work on it. But of course, I'm available to help out anytime. Just get a hold of me and we'll go from there.